In this week's episode, we consider AI developments from 2017.
Your 16-year-old kid doesn't need 1 million hours of driving data to learn how to drive.
Share our encounters with everyday AI.
Why would I do that in this bright orange texting app that just made me say sweet to it?
And offer advice to parents worrying about jobs for their children given the inevitable so-called AI apocalypse. Here's AI investor Kai-Fu Lee.
Doctors of love will pay higher than, a bartender of love.
Welcome to All Turtles Podcast, episode number 8. I am Blaise Zerega, editorial guy.
I'm Jessica Collier, one of the co-founders.
And Philip, the CEO guy. And 8 is great. I've been waiting to say that for 8 episodes.
Woohoo!
Oh, so happy.
Hello, 8.
It's kind of my favorite number.
I like it because it's infinite, infinity.
It's sort of like infinity stood up on its axis.
Sideways.
Yeah.
I love that Blaise has a reason he likes the number 8.
I'm red-faced.
It's a good number.
So it's getting to the end of 2017. It was a long year.
Yeah, good riddance.
It was the best of times, and say it, Jessica.
Worst of times.
All right.
It was a pretty great year. It's when we started. All Turtles. I think we made some pretty good progress. I'm pretty pleased with it. But yeah, maybe in a macro sense, there were some challenges in the year as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, other than the obviously All Turtles launching was a significant development in the realm of practical AI, and one that I've been thinking about a lot is the creation of AlphaGo Zero from Google's DeepMind. They had initially created AlphaGo, new version of AlphaGo. They called it Zero. It was sort of self-learning AI that, whereas the original AlphaGo, it had to learn by training itself by playing humans, whereas AlphaGo Zero just literally taught itself how to play Go. And I think that it's probably more narrow AI than practical AI because Go, beating a human at Go is not necessarily what I think of as a vexing everyday problem. It has opened the door now for applications far beyond Go. And, I think DeepMind has publicly stated that they're working on protein folding, and there's implications for that for diabetes, for kidney disease, and biomedical discovery and drug discovery. So I was excited by that.
I think the real new direction with this is this idea that we used to have this fetish for the past few years in AI, which was that everything's about the data, everything's about the training set. It's all about the training set. It's all about the training set. And you could never compete with the big companies. If you're a startup, you can't compete with Google because you can never have more training data than Google, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what AlphaGo Zero actually showed, ironic coming from Google, is that here's a case where there is no training set. It generates its own, it learns itself, it learns from first principles. This is first principles AI, which is a startling thing.
And that's so spot on and it sort of ties back to our conversation around personalization too, because in theory, all the data set that's needed now is my own patient data. For my own case of diabetes or my kidney disease. And
I've always felt that this was a kind of a bullshit thing about how people traditionally thought of ML, of machine learning and of deep learning, which is, you need all this training set. And otherwise you can't learn anything. So, if you want to build a self-driving car, well, you need millions and millions of hours of driving data to build it. If you want to build an AI to look at MRIs, you need, millions of MRI images to decipher it. But of course, that isn't how actual humans learn. Your 16-year-old kid doesn't need 1 million hours of driving data to learn how to drive. There is no doctor who's looked through millions of MRIs. You look through a few and you learn first principles and you learn it that way. So there was always the existence proof that the human brain is an existence proof that we can learn without massive training sets. But for whatever reason, for the past decade, we've been stuck in this lazy thinking that it's all about the training sets. And now, obviously, there are many, many cases. I would argue eventually it will be shown that it's most cases where it's not about the training data. It's about the algorithm. It's about the intelligence. Mm-hmm. And that's great news for AI startups because that theoretical giant wall that you can never overcome of not having more data than Google turns out to be at least partially bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
So I think 2017 was finally the year that the general purpose voice assistants became mainstream. It's something that I've been expecting to happen for a while, and I think in 2017 it happened. The Amazon Echo is definitely the most common thing that I interact with in the house. I use all the time. In fact, I often I miss if I'm traveling, if I'm in a hotel room, I will very often in my hotel room say, set an alarm, and then I don't get a response, and I forgot that he's not traveling with me.
And then you have to set your own alarm.
I set my own alarm. It's a
Wake-up call.
disaster. Yeah,
It's so sad.
I mean, he does it as well, but not quite as well. So I've just become totally used to it. In 2016, I had but it was still kind of a novelty. In 2017, it just became something that I live with, that I use all the time.
2017 was the year that AI actually paid me. I got a $10 gift certificate for reordering using.
Very nice.
Wow. Winning.
Okay, I've got a use case. Mine is super easy. This first happened to me a year or so ago, and I remember being really delighted by it, and it happened again recently, and I remembered how delighted I was. In iMessage on my iPhone, I was typing to someone, and I typed, "Sure, I'm free at," and then hit the space bar, and then the autocomplete showed me the 2 times on my calendar that I'm actually free today. And it does that. And just try it. Just type, assuming you have a calendar and you have some free time today, which isn't always the case for me, type, start an iMessage with someone, type I'm free at, hit the space bar, and it just lets you plug in when you're free. Super cool example. All sorts of things happening there to make it work. And it was great. So that is my very practical AI example that actually saved me quite a few seconds.
That's actually really cool. Speaking of which, if any of our 2 listeners have
if either of our listeners
have a calendar assistant, a virtual assistant that they particularly like, I am looking for recommendations, because I spend way too much time every day staring at my calendar trying to figure out where the slots are that are actually open. So give me recs.
LinkedIn has been making a lot of headlines about its use of AI, and that everyone who visits LinkedIn is interacting with AI, whether they know it or not. There was a headline in the San Jose Mercury News that says AI is like oxygen for LinkedIn. And okay, I get it, I suppose. But there I was on Veterans Day, logged on to LinkedIn. I was greeted with a very nice message saying, "Hey, happy Veterans Day. We support veterans like you." And I'm thinking, this so far so good, great, wonderful. How they know it's a veteran, And then it proceeds to say that to help me transition to the civilian world, they were going to, give me 1 year of free LinkedIn Premium. Again, very nice, very well-intentioned. I want to make that clear. Support LinkedIn on this effort. But it's just completely off base. I mean, it's been decades since I was in the service. I like to think I've successfully transitioned to civilian life. And,
you seem pretty civilian.
I might be a West Coast hippie. Some of my
there's
friends.
A lot of hair on that head.
We'll see.
So, major points for the good heart, the kind-hearted LinkedIn, but low score on the execution.
Well, thank you for your service.
So today I started using Penny, which is I actually don't know exactly what it is because I didn't get all the way through the onboarding. But it's like a financial sort of advisor / tracking app that you interact with primarily through text. And I'm in general really interested in the financial services sort of bots. I think a lot of them are really bad. Some of them do kind of interesting things. I've been a huge fan of Digit for forever. And Penny, I think, is it's this really potentially interesting product that comes up against the problem that most financial services bots come up against, which is everything is going mostly fine as you sort of run through with the bot, what it does and what it wants you to do so it can help you. And there's a lot in this bot that's it's gives you buttons to reply that are like cool and sweet and nice. So it's like very clearly aimed at like a highly specific like user demographic, which is to say probably millennials. And the programmed in responses are kind of insufferable, but you get through all the programmed in responses and you're like, sweet, thanks for that information, Penny. And you get to the point where they're like, okay, well, so now the thing that you need to do is enter your username and password for your bank. And you're just like, crickets. Like, why would I do that in this like bright orange texting app that just made me say sweet to it? Right?
A little cultural whiplash going on there.
Just a little bit. And there's no sort of like lead up to it. There's no like discussion of like trust and privacy or anything like that. It just kind of like goes for it.
Is it like is it just like a mismatch of tone?
Yes. I mean, it's a mismatch of tone, and it's also like there's no expectation setting.
So the lesson to learn.
And I went through every single branch of the onboarding conversation that was like, I want to know more, tell me more, like give me more information, don't give me the shortcut, like tell me everything you have, right? There are like all these shortcuts that you can take to like be like, oh, I know, I totally trust you, I get it, let's go, right? I didn't take any of them. I like went for all the information.
Yeah.
None.
And so like the lesson for designers there, if it's going to seem awkward for a conversation coming from a human, it's going to feel even more awkward if it's from a bot.
Right, especially when the bot texts you in like bright orange and it's the avatar is like, you know, this like sort of cartoonish looking person with like flipped up hair. Yeah, so maybe invest more in the, you know, transparency around the privacy process of what we're going to do with people's bank information. Mm-hmm. Maybe.
So here's where we normally do listener questions, but I think on this episode, we really just want to do one question, which is the one big one, the question that I get the most often, and I think we get the most often in some context, which goes something like this. I was having coffee with a friend of mine a few days ago, and she said, what should I tell my 2-year-old daughter? What should I teach my 2-year-old daughter to maximize the chances of her surviving the inevitable AI apocalypse? And we hear this all the time. Usually I make some joke about it, but really I think when people say, hey, apocalypse, they really mean one of two things. They literally either mean that, you know, the robots come and kill everyone. That's a topic for a different show. Usually they really mean jobs. What do we teach kids so that they have the best shot at having an AI-proof job in the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years?
I've asked several people this question past several months as well, ranging from Senator John Warner of Virginia.
Senators, hopefully, among the first jobs to get eliminated by the AI.
Stop it.
Please. I, for one, welcome our AI government overlords.
AI politics. But Warner, he's a father. He's got three children, and 2 of his kids, one works in digital advertising, the other in interior design, and he thought that both of those professions would go fairly quickly by the wayside. And he didn't really have an answer other than say that his advice to people was to figure out what skills are needed and attain those skills. Let's hear what he had to say. And you mentioned you have children, and AI is coming. Mm-hmm. And so what would be your career advice for them? If they ask your dad, what should I do when I grow up?
So far, they're still on the dad support network. But I got 2 of them live in New York, and one's got some health issues. But it's just it's one's doing digital advertising, so should be caught up in that. I don't think you're going to remove that skill set by AI. The other doing interior design, so probably again you're going to need some. But what we don't know is how fast all of this is coming. I do think that some of these things, back in the early 80s when I got involved in cell phones, the Bell operating companies, and I started next to Bell operating companies and Wall Street said it would take 30 years to build out a cell phone network, and at the end of that 30 years, 5% of Americans would have cell phones. They were wrong, and I did pretty well. So I think that same phenomena, Gavin was talking about some of the things, deliveries. Well, we had, the drone delivery that delivered Chipotle. So we're really aggressively as a state trying to go after like unmanned systems. We're going after cyber jobs. We're going after satellite. There are growth areas. but they're all areas that are going to require a skill level that goes beyond what it used to take to work on the line. And that's the kind of underlying figure out.
Meanwhile, Kai-Fu Lee, Chinese investor in AI, he has argued and told me about he thinks jobs that are currently low valued today are going to become more highly valued in the future, and specifically naming bartenders, counselors, therapists, people who communicate and can do something with human empathy that machines cannot.
And I think service industry is the only way, because if you look at what are the two things, go back to simplistic, it's more complex than that, but if we sort of boil down to 2 points, what are the two types of things AI cannot do? Number one, creativity, and number two, social interaction. And creativity, great, we can have more scientists, artists, and movie writers and book writers and poetry and all that, but how many can we possibly, we're not going to have people with no talent do that, right? So, the number of people with talent to create is going to be a small percentage. So the vast majority will have to go into the social part. Mm-hmm. And social part is something the computer is not very good at because it has no common sense, no self-awareness, no empathy, no love, and poor general communication skills, even though it can fake it to a certain extent. So we just have to create those service jobs and also elevate the status of these jobs so that it appears desirable to many people to take them. And whether they're high-paying or low-paying, I don't think beggars can be choosy. We need to make whatever jobs we can, and they'll pay whatever they pay. Some will surely pay higher. Doctors of love will pay higher than, a bartender of love. But there will be some scale.
Have you guys used a robot bartender? Have you had any experience with fully robotic bartenders? Because I obviously have, but
do they tell you jokes? And
well, that's the thing. So you can actually make a robot that mixes some pretty great drinks, and then you kind of realize that I could have also just done this at home. That isn't why.
I've seen the video of the robot that makes you a cup of coffee.
Well, so at the Metreon, that thing is there. I forget what it's called, but it's actually pretty good. I actually had that recently. It's a good cup of coffee. And it's different from bartenders because when you're going to get coffee made, you're not there for the conversation, right? Usually, you just kind of want your Starbucks and you want to get out. But
well, for Starbucks,
that's in America. But I think in Italy you hang out at the bar.
Perhaps, yeah.
there are elements of cafe culture that don't have anything to do with a caffeine fix.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But at a bar, I think there's a lot of it. So that's actually kind of interesting, right?
And then also I had another conversation with Stephen Wolfram, talking about this very issue.
You know a lot of really cool people.
And he was telling me that he thinks archaeology is a AI proof profession, and one that's
except for the senator. I mean, the other two.
I'll tell you what my answer is.
What's your answer? You've got children too.
Yes, right. Well, my children decide what they're doing for themselves. But my general answer to people who ask, what's the future of kind of activities? Think about a field, call it X, whether it's archaeology or zoology. And my claim is there either is now a computational X or there will be. If there isn't one now, that's a really good thing to get into, because every field is being sort of computationalized. What I mean by that is that there's kind of there's a way of thinking about things, there's a way of approaching things that involves kind of structured thinking, data, these kinds of things. And what we're seeing is some fraction of the world has been computationalized, some fraction has not been. That will be a growth area. The people who understand sort of computational thinking, those will be the people who will be able to lead and figure out what to do.
One that's often suggested is trades people, plumbers, carpenters, and we've all seen that. We'll put in the show notes the video of the bricklaying robot or the robots that can do a lot of construction work. The interesting thing, though, is plumbing is a great challenge because you say, okay, there's no way a robot or AI can handle getting underneath the sink and moving that drain pipe. And it's really just a dexterity problem. It's not an AI issue. And Wolfram believes that rather we will change the world, that buildings in the future will be constructed with, say, the pipes outside the building, so that there'll be some kind of robot that Spider-Man-like climbs up. A robot will be like a transformer, and its hands will turn into wrenches as needed, pliers and so on, and manipulate the pipes to fix your drain or unclog your pipe.
So that's interesting to hear that's how Steve and Wolfram answered the question. But while you were talking, Blaise, I just typed in that same question into Wolfram Alpha, the app that they have. So I asked Wolfram Alpha, what jobs will still be important after the AI revolution? And here's what the AI says. It says, AI Revolution is a Japanese manga series written and illustrated by Yu Asami. It began serialization in Princess in June 1985. The individual chapters were collected and published something.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I mean, so
not the best possible answer.
No, not from Wolfram Alpha.
Yeah, but apparently, Wolfram Alpha wants you to think that the job that will survive the AI revolution is
manga
comic artist. Yeah, so there you go. Which actually probably not a bad answer.
Yeah, but I think that we have to mention the book Homo Sapiens. Came out last year.
Sapiens.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Sapiens. Yes.
Yeah, Homo Deus was the
Homo Deus
follow-up.
was the first one. Yeah,
Nope. It was Sapiens first, and then Homo Deus was the follow-up.
Don't try to step to Phil on this. He knows.
Sapiens was the first. Yes.
Come at me, bro.
All right, Sapiens done. Sapiens warned that there's basically going to be two classes of people, right? Those who are controlled by robots and those who control the robots. So the jobs you'd want to find a job that enables you to control AI and sit atop these robot overlords. And so we really haven't answered those professions. And I don't think you need to. I haven't named those professions for me necessarily because it's not a binary world that we're heading into. That's my belief is that instead we're going to coexist. And there will be certain jobs that robots will do. And that will be automated and that AI can do more efficiently and so on. And there'll be new jobs and others that may not, we may not even know what they exist yet, I guess. They don't exist yet.
I mean, I feel like this is a very cliched response to this question, and it's biased because this is something that I feel like is one of my strengths. But I think anything that requires very nuanced communication and like thinking through sort of knotty critical problems is probably at least for now relatively AI proof. We're not actually doing that much with AI in terms of like software that can teach itself to do those things, right? And there's going to be a demand, I think, for a long time for that. But that is not the same thing as like saying, go get a STEM degree and then go get a high-paying job, right? You have to be very sort of dexterous in how you navigate your professional life if the thing that you focus on with your education like revolves around critical thinking and communication and language and all of those sort of softer skills.
Yeah, so I've got kind of a few different ways to think about this question. One is I don't actually think that in the medium term, in the next like 10 to 20 years, that AI is going to net eliminate a lot of jobs. I think it'll eliminate certain types of jobs. I think it'll create lots of other types of jobs. And so I think like for the next, decade or so, I actually think sort of net, we're not massively fewer jobs. For example, a typical example is, autonomous trucking, autonomous driving. People say, as soon as you have autonomous driving, it's going to eliminate so many jobs because there's so many tens of millions of jobs in this country, hundreds of millions worldwide that are basically driving jobs, and they all disappear. And, that's partially true. Over time, like most of those jobs will disappear. But think about the jobs that are going to get created in their place. Once you have autonomous driving being pretty prominent, it more or less solves traffic. Right? Traffic is caused by humans making lots of mistakes and lots of errors. Once you have even a decent percentage of autonomous vehicles in the road, you get far less traffic, which is great. But what it does is it extends the area around the major metropolitan area that people want to live in probably tenfold. So if you just kind of figure like, well, everyone wants to live within a half-hour commute to the center of the city, to their work. Well, right now, that half-hour commute around, the center of San Francisco is like, 10 square miles. If you get rid of traffic, then that same half-hour commute, you can probably make then, 30 miles, 40 miles. It is a massive increase in the circle in which people want to live in.
Is that desirable though? That's
more sprawl?
Right, exactly.
It is totally desirable because what it does is at least from a jobs creation point of view, because it eliminates the driving jobs, but then it's going to create an order of magnitude more, construction jobs and jobs where like all of these neighborhoods now need to be built up because
Couldn't
now
those construction jobs just go to building denser housing and like office space in the actual cities themselves.
Well, they'll do both, right? Because like even though people want to live within a half hour of the center of the city, like some people want to be able to walk there. You're not going to like the number of places you can walk to aren't going to increase. So there's still like plenty of higher density construction, but there's also just a lot more jobs and development and commerce and everything else in the burbs. So, but that's not saying whether it's desirable or not. I think it's okay. That's a medium term, like no net decrease in jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Longer term, I think it's a very different story.
And so what is our advice to parents?
So,
if you two had to like redo your education or your early professional lives, like would you do things differently? What would you do like based on this question?
Well, I'd graduate from college. Still haven't done, but maybe soon. Actually, there's a chance that I may finally get my bachelor's degree in a few months.
Well, but you're like one credit or something away from having your bachelor's degree, and you studied
credits.
Computer science,
I studied
right?
computer science, yeah.
Yeah. So what would you do differently, knowing what you know now? Would you do anything differently?
No, but I think I got lucky. I think I like lucked into some decent choices. I think computer science is a great thing to study. I actually think that any communications thing is a good thing to study. So I think there's going to be a lot more need for writers, for performers, for people who understand communication, because that's like AI is going to make that more necessary. I would probably have studied more design and maybe the intersection of like design and cognitive science. That wasn't really that big of a deal when I was going through college, but now it is. But I would have kept to some kind of computer science thing. I think there's two ways of looking at it, or three. There's jobs that are still going to be around. And you guys are both totally right. It's the jobs that require that human connection. So the classic example is nursing. Like nursing,
Mm-hmm.
like there is always going to be more need for care, for caregivers, for nurses. It doesn't matter once we have robot nurses. There's still going to be more and more need of human people to actually take care of people, to have that human connection. And I can't see a world where there's not more demand for nursing. So there's like specific things like that, right? Then there's the class of jobs that aren't just not going to be eliminated by AI, but are going to be improved. So like what kind of work will be made better by this new technology? You can think about it like that. I think, for example, a lot of like forensic stuff, accounting, auditing, like a lot of that stuff is just made much better once you have AI tools. You still need like the human ingenuity and creativity, but the AI tools like get rid of some of the drudge work
yeah.
for it. So like that's important. But then like the most important thing I think is I don't have kids, which I'm sure the world is thankful for. But if I did, I think the most important thing for me would be to try to make it so that my kids, when they're adults, have a sense of meaning that is not dependent on their job, that isn't dependent on their paycheck. Because I think that's the main change. Like the future of work for me is the future of meaning. I can see how we're going to give everyone an income. It's much harder for me to see how we're going to give everyone meaning. And I think for the past few centuries, too many people have been taking the shortcut of saying their primary meaning comes from their work. And boy, is that going to break. So I would try really hard to instill in my children some other source for meaning that isn't tied to their paycheck.
This is what we call the humanities.
Yeah.
It's where you discover your humanity.
Or fantasy sports, whatever.
Blaise, you have two kids.
I
What
do.
what do you tell
I think,
them?
to follow up Phil's answer, I would also emphasize the ability of learning how to learn and to continue to learn. And it's easy to say that, but to look for those fields, those areas of study that encourage that. So it could be music. I'm thinking, humanities, composing music, understanding music, spotting music patterns. What it does to the brain is marvelous.
It'd be interesting to look at a survey. Maybe we should just do this survey to see like what is a primary source of meaning in people's lives. And I'm sure you'll get answers that are, I'm sure the buckets are like work, and that's going to be a big one, right? And that's very much a kind of Western sort of Protestant work ethic, idea. But that's got to be very common. It's like the primary meaning comes from work. But other people are going to say religion. I'm sure a big one is family. I'm sure, some people are going to say, something like sports. Like there's like, what are the things that give people meaning? And like all of those are still going to be real, except for the work one, which is going to really diminish in terms of the percentage of the population that's going to be able to find their primary meaning through work is going to be much, much smaller than it is right now in 20 years. So the other buckets are going to have to like step up to take advantage of them to fill that meaning gap.
I think part of the, it's probably not original thought at all, but the way work has taken on such a lion's share of one's self-worth is we have this tradition of historically of people measuring their worth by what they could produce with their own hands. And that, as through industrialization, through, automation, through computers, so on, that has obviously gotten less and less. That when one dies, what do they leave behind physically? Very, very, very few things, quite frankly. So there is an opportunity to increase the value of what one can do himself, herself. Translating their ideas into physical reality. I think it's something that I'd encourage my children.
When I was just in Japan in Kanazawa a couple of months ago, I was at a ceramics factory. They made really beautiful cups and ceramics, and also guitars and ukuleles. Strange combination, but I bought a ukulele there. And they had this amazing quote on the wall that just said, "Be at peace, work with your hands." I think that's very cool.
Amen to that.
That is very cool. However, I'm going to be the curmudgeon again and just say that I think what people are scared of are people who are scared of losing their jobs to AI are generally people who have less job security already. And like often those are people who already do work with their hands, right? Like it's a really privileged position to be in a position where you get your meaning from work, because it means that like you're doing something where you have like enough sort of standing to feel that you derive like your identity from work.
Not necessarily, right? I think there's a very strong strain of meaning that kind of runs through the US and probably other countries, but very strong here, which is that like your primary affiliation, your primary identification, your primary source of meaning is the job. And that's just as true 50 years ago for, union car manufacturers or, people in the skilled trade crafts. That kind of goes all the way back to the guild system and, in Europe. Like people have been taking their work as the primary source of meaning in their life for a long time.
Well, it's been the organizing principle.
The organizing
right?
principle
like
of much of the Western world.
When you say like people derive their meaning from it, what you mean is that their lives are organized around it.
And they're told that that's the important thing. And what I'm saying is that isn't going to be sustainable. There's still going to be a small number of people that are privileged, that are for, whether it's earned or unearned privilege is a different question, but that are lucky enough, that are fortunate enough to be in a position where they're still going to be able to derive their primary meaning from work. Like I certainly derive my primary meaning from my work right now. Absolutely. And yeah, it's because I'm lucky enough to have a job that like, this is what I do. This is my life's work. But right now, my guess is that a very large percentage of society also at least thinks that their primary meaning is their work, and that's going to go away. Like in 20 years, it's going to be a very small number of people that can do that. The rest of the world is going to have to figure out some other way to have meaning. And if I had kids, that is the thing that I would be trying to help them figure out, is like figure out what's going to give you meaning. Don't rely on the paycheck to do it, because you may not need it.
But make sure you have a paycheck, because when the U.S. I will like roll over in my grave when the U.S. passes universal income.
Yeah, I mean, but that stuff is easier for me to see how it's going to work. So some version of that, I think, is largely inevitable. It's either that or a literal apocalypse. Yeah. So one of those two things is going to happen.
It's easier to envision the universal basic income.
Yeah, that's just math.
All right, so I guess we can effectively close the door on 2017. Can't say it was that much fun.
Yeah, and the closing the door on episode 8 as well.
I had fun. It was a good episode, and On balance,
I meant
think
2017, not the episode.
Well, I know, but we got a lot of good stuff done in 2017 and a challenging year, but I think we at least partially rose to the challenge, and hopefully we'll have an even better year next year.
I definitely hope that next year is better.
I can't wait.
Well, 2018's got an 8 in it.
Happy New Year.
See you on the other side.
This podcast is a production of the All Turtles Worldwide Media Empire. We owe a big end-of-the-year thank you to Jim Metzendorf for editing and to Chris Plug for audio production. Podcast artwork is by Carlos Rocafort IV and Gabe Campodonico. Theme music is by Matt Ammerman and inspired by Japan Railways. The interstitials are recreations of some of our favorite JR jingles. We'll be taking next week off for the holidays, and we'll see you in the new year with episode 9. Tune in then, when we'll have Evgenia Cayuta of My Replica in studio. On behalf of Jessica Collier, Phil Libin, and yours truly, Blaise Zerega, and the rest of the All Turtles team, Happy New Year, and thanks for listening.